I was 16 years old and I was playing goalkeeper for my indoor soccer team. And I got scored on by a girl. Imagine that. And maybe that says something about my maturity level at that time that really bothered me, but it did. So she scored on me, and then she scored on me again. And so I turned around, punched the wall as hard as I could. And I didn't think it was a big deal, but weeks went by and my hand stayed swollen. Ended up having dislocated the backs of these knuckles, whatever those are. Had to get 3 metal rods stuck in my hand. Missed my entire junior year of varsity baseball. Had to take the ACT and SAT in a cast. And so it was not a whole lot of fun. But thankfully, I learned from that experience. And so when I was 18 years old, I had just come off my first experiment into a long-term romantic relationship, which that experiment was rather disastrous for everyone involved. But I was coming off that, and I was kind of giving my ex and her new boyfriend a hard time, just messing with them, being a jerk. And he came over one night, kind of confront me, and I went out there acting all arrogant and ignorant and kind of looking for a fight. And much to my surprise, he gave me a fight. So we got in this like shoving, punch throwing thing. Neither of us knew what we were doing. But I walk inside and my arm's stuck up here. Can't put it down. So I end up at the emergency room at like 2 in the morning with a doctor. It's got a rope tied around my body pulling this way. 2 nurses grabbing my arm pulling that way, pulling me apart so that they can pop my shoulder back into place. And spent the summer after my senior year of high school in a sling. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is something that I'm clearly very highly qualified to teach about, which is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize and respond to emotions constructively and effectively, both within yourself and in other people. If you think about IQ as measuring your intellectual intelligence, EQ, right, is sort of the counterpart for emotional intelligence. And now, why I want to talk to you about this is because I really believe that emotional intelligence is the key skill set to living a happier life. And just as importantly, that skill set is trainable. So for the last 4 years, I've been studying happiness, a real 180 from some of my previous stories. So that included creating the world's first happiness major at the University of Alabama, teaching the first happiness class there. I've won research grants, seed grants, and between my speaking, coaching, and writing, I've reached hundreds of thousands of people all over the world at this point. I also lived as a Zen monk. So the reason I share all that is because what I've come to believe is that emotional intelligence is really the key thing to focus on if you want to be happier. Because my whole study of happiness was never about sort of a philosophical definition like, what is happiness? It's more how to be happier, how to live a happier life. So in order to understand this connection between emotional intelligence and happiness, you kind of start with this question then, well, where does happiness come from? And it turns out there's a pretty definitive answer to that question. Before we get into the science, I'll share just sort of intuitive experience with you. Just think about the happiest moments of your life. Maybe pick one to zoom in on. It could be a season of life, like maybe your last semester of college or whatever. Could be a specific moment in time. Now, does that moment involve someone else? Someone you love, friends, family, people that you really care about and enjoy being around? I'm willing to bet it does. So we know intuitively on some level that relationships are the key to happiness, but there's also science that confirms this. If you want the full 15-minute version, I highly recommend Robert Waldinger's TED Talk on this subject, but the short version, in that talk, he mentions the Grant study, which is basically the longest running psychological study of its kind. It's been going on over 100 years now, I think, across multiple generations. And it basically took this huge group of people and looked at every area of their life, just what mattered. So it's kind of like, I call it like happiness gold, right? Like a study like that, so incredibly useful, and I've used it to shape my life. And what this study found, How much money you made didn't really matter. How successful you were didn't really matter. What you did didn't really matter. Even how popular you were or the amount of relationships you had did not really matter. The only thing that mattered for your quality of life is the quality of your relationships. And that does not mean just romantic relationship. Also means like friends, family, kind of collectively as a whole, the quality of your relationships. So, we have that first connection there, right? Happiness comes from the quality of our relationships. Well, then the next question is, well, what makes good relationships? And one way to think about this, real easy, is what makes bad relationships? Lack of communication, codependency, kind of toxicity, we bring out the worst in each other, being a bad influence, right? Like negativity, right? High expectations, all these things basically that are a lack of emotional intelligence, right? People who can't deal with their own emotions effectively and don't really know how to navigate the emotions of others. That's what ruins relationships. Think about this from a little more scientific perspective. You can look at the work of someone like Shasta Nelson, who looks at friendship. And to her, friendship depends upon three things. She calls it the friendship triangle: consistency, vulnerability, and positivity. All of those are kind of getting at this emotional intelligence, right? Being accountable and consistent, being open, vulnerable, communicating, and of course being positive. When you look at romantic relationships, one study I looked at took 43 different data sets from 29 different laboratories and found that the things that mattered for high quality romantic relationships were perceived partner commitment, perceived partner satisfaction, appreciation, conflict management, and sexual satisfaction. So all of those, maybe not sexual satisfaction, but hey, we'll include it. Maybe that one. 4.5. All of those are emotional intelligence, right? So perceived partner commitment and satisfaction. How well is one partner expressing how they feel to the other, and how well is the other partner perceiving and interpreting that? Of course, conflict. Well, when these difficult emotions, negative emotions do arise, right, how do you manage those effectively? And then appreciation. So what we arrive at here is kind of a connection, right? 3 parts. So we say that happiness comes from quality relationships, and quality relationships come from emotional intelligence. So if you want to have a happier life, you got to focus on building that emotional intelligence. And at this point, it's a good spot to say, well, Jackson, isn't this kind of like saying, well, taller people are happier? Which, according to Gallup Healthways, is actually true. Sorry. Or better looking people are happier, right? It wouldn't really matter if this were just a fixed attribute. But it turns out emotional intelligence is highly trainable. And that's because it depends upon mindfulness, awareness. So if you think about emotional intelligence, as I kind of said earlier, you can think about it in this way. So it's the ability to recognize emotions and then control how you respond to them, both thinking about that in the context of yourself and other people. So if you think about recognizing the emotions in yourself, that's like self-awareness, and then self-management, right? How do I respond? Self-regulation. If you think about that in other people, again, it's kind of this awareness. It's empathy, what are the emotions they're experiencing? And then social skills, managing people. You know, how do we deal with those emotions? And so in either case, whether it's internal or external facing, the foundation in both cases is that awareness, that mindfulness of being able to identify the emotions as they arrive. And of course, mindfulness is trainable. That's what mindfulness practice is. That's what meditation is. You can practice bringing your attention to whatever's arising, thoughts and emotions. And in doing that, you actually increase the foundation there for your emotional intelligence. So a really simple practice you can do right away to start experimenting with this is simply the hello practice. And all that means is you sit for 10 minutes, let's say, every day, and you say hello to whatever's arising, whatever thoughts and emotions. And interestingly, I say thoughts and emotions because in Tibetan, which is a very Buddhist-inspired language, there's only one word for thoughts and emotions. Nyonga. Same word for these mental formations, mental experiences. Because a lot of time the thought and emotion, like, they're kind of commingled. So when you're doing this, you're sitting there, and all of a sudden you say, oh, hello worry. Oh, hello anxiety. Hello tension. Hello planning. And it doesn't sound like much, but every time you do that, you're strengthening that ability, strengthening that way to be aware of whatever's going on in yourself, simply paying attention. Because you know more about emotional intelligence than you think. Simple example of that is, say we're out at the bar or wherever, we kind of get in a fight, right? All of a sudden I say, hey, you know what? Let's fight about it. Something looks weird there, right? Well, that's because when you think about interpreting other people's emotions, when the back of the hands are facing away, that's a symbol of aggression. Head down, also a symbol of aggression. Right? Let's fight. That makes a little more sense than let's fight. Right? So you already know this if you will just pay attention. So that's what these mindfulness practices help you do. So what I'll leave you with is a story. One of the first coaching clients I ever worked with, he came to me in sort of personal crisis where he had been drinking with him and his girlfriend and got in this big argument, and things actually got physical. And so that was a wake-up call to him. He needed help. And so he came to me, and the first thing I had him work on doing was this hello exercise. Right? Learn to say hello to anger, hello to pain, whatever. And so he comes back to me a few weeks later. I call him, and he's like, dude, you can't imagine what just happened to me today. So I walked in after a long day's work. It was a really rough day. And I come in, stub my toe on the coffee table. Boom. Hits it. I'm ready to just explode. So frustrated, so angry. And all of a sudden I just hear myself say, hello, pain. Imagine that. Hello, pain. Can shift in a moment from this anger, pain, tension, suffering into just awareness. And think of how he would have responded to that, right? Or think of how I would respond instead of punching my hand and breaking my hand, or punching a wall and breaking my hand, or getting a fight, dislocating my shoulder, right? You just simply hold it in awareness, and you can control how you respond to it. Okay, so that is one example, but it's a microcosm of the impact that emotional intelligence can have on your life. So I encourage you to begin training, building that foundation of mindfulness to increase your emotional intelligence because, as we said, emotional intelligence is the foundation for quality relationships, and quality relationships are the foundation for happiness. So if you want to live a happier life, focus on emotional intelligence, and it can start with something as simple as just saying hello.